Hands up! Don't move! The sharp command cut through the somber atmosphere, leaving Teresa Carter frozen. Minutes ago, she had been walking home, thinking about her future at Madison University. Now she was staring down the barrel of a policeman's gun, accused of a crime she did not commit. Her heart was pounding. She wanted to explain, to pull out her ID, to show them the truth. But the look on their faces warned her that it didn't matter. And when they discovered the badge in her backpack, a badge with the CIA insignia, things took an unexpected turn. What happened next would shake the entire system. Stay tuned, because you won't believe this one. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss stories like this. At 18, Teresa Carter had finished her senior year at Bradford High School with highest honors. She had just been accepted to Madison University on a generous scholarship, her dream school, located in the heart of the city she loved. It was mid-April, and she planned to celebrate with her mother that evening, maybe even take her out to dinner at their favorite family restaurant. On that fateful afternoon, Teresa left school later than usual, having stayed behind to attend an emergency debate club meeting. She took her regular bus, the number 9, which weaved through some of the busiest neighborhoods on the north side. Teresa always carried a bulging backpack filled with textbooks, physics, calculus, and government, along with a slim laptop case. Tucked into a hidden pocket of the bag was a small identification card. It had her name, Teresa Carter, and engraved in the corner was the unmistakable seal of the CIA. She had been issued the card just a few months earlier, a final step before she officially began a specialized training program at the end of the summer. The bus ride had gone smoothly, with office workers dozing and a few students scrolling on their phones. Teresa got off near Glendale, intending to walk the last few blocks. The sky was awash with orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Just then, a commotion broke out at the intersection ahead. 3 police cruisers had converged in front of a convenience store that Teresa often passed. Their lights flashed red and blue on the sidewalk. Without warning, the officers fanned out, weapons drawn. Someone shouted a vague description: young, female, tall, wearing a dark hoodie. And Teresa suddenly realized they were referring to her. She stiffened, instinctively raising her hands in surrender, her mind racing to recall every step she had taken that day. Her voice caught in her throat as the nearest officer yelled at her to get down. Fear and confusion flooded her, but she tried to keep her composure. Then they searched her backpack, and when they found her CIA badge, the scene shifted to something no one had seen coming. Red and blue lights splashed the narrow alleyway with dizzying, pulsating color. Teresa Franklin felt her stomach clench. Even at a distance, she could tell something was wrong. She noticed the tense posture of the officers, their raised voices echoing off the brick walls. Though Teresa couldn't make out their exact words, the urgency in their shouts warned her to keep her distance. Still, she tried to quietly slip around the commotion, but before she could turn the corner, a voice boomed, "Hey, you! Stop right there!" She froze, unsure if they meant her. A second shout left no doubt. "You in the hoodie! Hands up!" Teresa's heart pounded. She wore a simple black hoodie, jeans, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. Nothing unusual, yet fear coursed through her. Slowly, she raised her hands, scanning the area for any sign of help. A few onlookers stood back, phones in hand, recording everything. 2 police officers advanced, their palms resting on their holstered weapons. The older officer, Richards, glared. "What are you doing here?" Teresa tried to keep her voice steady. I'm heading home. I only live a couple of blocks away." The younger officer, Alvarez, cut in. "We're searching for suspects tied to a burglary earlier today. You match the description." Confusion swelled within her. How could she possibly match any description? She'd been in class all day. Dozens of teachers and classmates could confirm it. "But don't argue," Officer Richards snapped. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." A spike of panic shot through her. She remembered her mother's constant reminders. Stay calm, keep your voice level, never make sudden moves. She gave a nod, hoping her compliance might de-escalate the situation. Without warning, Alvarez grabbed Teresa's arms, wrenching them behind her back. He snapped cuffs around her wrists, uncomfortably tight. Teresa winced as Richards rummaged through her backpack, tossing aside a chemistry textbook, an empty lunch container, and a spiral notebook loaded with debate club notes. Then he discovered her laptop pouch and pried it open. His eyes narrowed at the small ID badge inside. "What's this supposed to be?" he demanded, holding it up as if it were contraband. Teresa's mind whirled. She hadn't planned to mention her CIA internship, but now it might be her only lifeline. "It's a government internship badge," she said quietly. Officer Richards let out a derisive laugh. "Do we look stupid? This is fake. Think you're clever?" Before Teresa could respond, he slammed the pouch shut and pocketed the badge. "We'll take a closer look at the station," he growled. Tension built in her chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. Being only 18 didn't grant her the luxury of losing control. Right now, all she could do was comply and pray the truth would emerge. As Richards and Alvarez marched her toward the squad cars, Teresa could feel curious eyes on her, phones still recording. She had no idea how the next hours would unfold, only that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. Muttered curses followed Selena Porter as she was shoved into the back of a squad car. Tears welled in her eyes. She knew this was bad, very bad. Her mother would be worried sick, and Selena's worst fear was that she'd become just another statistic, another name in a long line of people of color wrongly detained or harmed by law enforcement. She could already picture the headlines, though no one might care enough to print them. Promising honor student charged in robbery. The officer slammed the door, the sound echoing in Selena's chest like a judge's gavel. She tried to breathe, tried to stay calm. Surely this was some horrible misunderstanding that would resolve once they checked her attendance records or talked to her teachers. But as the squad car lurched away from the curb, Selena saw her future, her dream of attending Wendell University, her entire life plan, suddenly dangling by a thread. Hours blurred by in a haze of humiliation and fear. Selena found herself on a cold metal bench at the precinct, cheeks damp with tears she tried to wipe away using her shoulder, since her hands were cuffed behind her. Officers Rowan and Davis popped in and out, sometimes sneering, sometimes ignoring her entirely. She had no idea what was happening beyond those locked doors, whether they were actually looking for evidence tying her to a supposed robbery or just stalling for time. Deep inside, Selena clung to hope that they'd eventually let her make a phone call. She silently recited her mother's number, a sequence she'd known since childhood, as if it were a protective mantra. 224-55-4973. It was the one piece of certainty she had left. Finally, an officer Selena hadn't seen before, an older black woman named Detective Haley, stepped into the holding area. She regarded Selena with a flicker of what might have been empathy. "All right, Miss Porter," she said quietly, reaching into her pocket for a key. "Let's get you processed." Relief washed over Selena when the cuffs came off so she could be fingerprinted and photographed. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glow on every surface, making the whole experience feel like a nightmare. She wanted to ask if she could call her mother, but her throat felt too tight to speak. Detective Haley must have sensed Selena's distress because she gestured to a phone on a nearby desk. "Once we finish here," she murmured, "you can make a call." Those few words were a lifeline. Selena nodded, blinking back tears as she noticed the stares from several officers. It wasn't lost on her that she was the only person of color in view, and undoubtedly the youngest. She thought of her mother, who'd be pacing their small apartment by now, phone in hand, fear twisting in her stomach. And she thought of her future, which just hours ago had seemed so promising. Now it felt dangerously close to unraveling. All Selena could do was cling to one truth. She was innocent. One phone call, one chance to prove who she really was, might make all the difference. And she prayed with all her heart that someone would finally listen. She was 18, black and female, and for too many in law enforcement, that alone cast suspicion. Once the fingerprinting was done, Brielle Carter was led to a phone. Detective Harris stood a discreet distance away, letting Brielle dial in relative privacy, though her heart still thundered with anxiety. On the fourth ring, her mother Miriam answered. "Mom!" Brielle's voice cracked at the sound of her mother's worried hello. They arrested me." She heard Miriam gasp on the other end. "Arrested? Brielle, what on earth happened? Where are you?" Brielle's explanation tumbled out in halting spurts about the convenience store, the police, and the false accusation. Miriam cut her off, not out of anger, but urgency. "Stay calm, baby. I'm on my way. I'll call Mr. Foster," she said. Mr. Foster was an old family friend who worked as a small-town attorney. He'd helped the Carters before. Though the call ended quickly, Brielle felt marginally better knowing help was coming. Over the next few hours, Brielle was questioned by officers Jacobs and Carver. They insisted they had an eyewitness claiming someone matching Brielle's description was lurking near the store earlier. They also pointed to her mere presence near the scene as evidence. Each time Brielle explained she'd been at school during the alleged robbery, her words seemed to vanish into a void of disbelief. She tried bringing up her perfect attendance record, mentioned that teachers could confirm her schedule, but the officers scoffed or rolled their eyes. They also mocked her so-called fake CIA badge. No matter what she said, it felt like quicksand. Every explanation only sank her deeper in their suspicion. By midnight, she was physically and emotionally drained. Detective Harris returned with a small bag of chips and a bottle of water, placing them on the table. Though Brielle was grateful for the gesture, she couldn't ignore the sense that Harris, too, viewed her as just another teenage delinquent, perhaps just more politely. Shortly after, Mr. Foster arrived with Miriam in tow. Brielle had never been so relieved. Miriam looked frantic. Her neat braids had come undone at the edges, tears reddening her eyes. She rushed forward, arms outstretched to hug her daughter, only to be gently stopped by a uniformed officer. Brielle forced a shaky smile from a distance. Mr. Foster, a middle-aged white man with a calm, thoughtful demeanor, introduced himself to Detective Harris before turning to Brielle. "Don't say anything else without me present," he whispered. Brielle nodded, grateful for the support. Foster demanded to see whatever evidence they claimed to have. Officer Jacobs started to respond, but trailed off. All Brielle could do was inhale slowly, clinging to the hope that someone, anyone, would finally see the truth. Vague references to a so-called eyewitness were all they gave. Teresa Franklin's lawyer, Mr. Lewis, demanded to see the footage from the convenience store's security cameras, but the officers insisted it was still being reviewed. Teresa suspected they were stalling because the video wouldn't show her at all. Eventually, Teresa was placed under formal arrest, charged with suspicion of robbery, and scheduled for arraignment within days. The gravity of that moment hit her like a physical blow. She had never felt so powerless. When her mother was finally allowed to hug her, Teresa broke into sobs, realizing she was now trapped in a legal labyrinth she didn't deserve. Detective Brown led her to a cell, apologizing quietly. But since Teresa was technically an adult, having turned 18 just months ago, she would be placed among other adult female detainees. Some eyed her curiously, and she sank onto a metal bench, wrapping her arms around herself as if to form a shield. Her thoughts drifted to the CIA badge. If only she could talk to someone high enough in the agency to confirm her internship. Maybe all this would clear up. Yet Teresa also recalled the strict confidentiality she'd agreed to. Would the agency admit her status, or would they distance themselves to avoid bad press? The steel door clanged shut, leaving her staring at peeling paint on the opposite wall, her stomach in knots. She wasn't just worried about legal trouble. She feared for the future she'd worked so hard to create. A flicker of dread intruded. Her acceptance to Grant University could be revoked if she ended up with a criminal record. The CIA, too, might cut ties to dodge the negative attention. Dozens of nightmares churned in her mind, none ending well. That night seemed endless. Teresa tried to rest, but each time she dozed off, she'd jerk awake to the echo of keys or the shuffle of other detainees. Images of her mother's tearful face kept forcing tears from Teresa's own eyes, though she fought to stay strong. She wondered if tomorrow might finally bring the exoneration she desperately needed, or if it would tighten the noose around her neck. 2 days later, she found herself in the back of a sheriff's van, hands cuffed in front of her, en route to Oak Ridge Federal Courthouse for her arraignment. That imposing building had always intrigued her when she passed by it on school field trips or during weekend outings with her mother. Now she was approaching it in shackles. Her mother and Mr. Lewis had tried to secure bail, but at the initial hearing, the judge seemed unconvinced by Teresa's insistence of innocence. So she'd spent those nights in custody, anxiety mounting with each hour. As the van pulled up to the stone steps of Oak Ridge, Teresa's heart pounded. She watched uniformed officers file out, then gestured for her to follow. Each step felt heavier than the last. Despite her fear, a flicker of resolve burned within her. If no one else would prove her innocence, she would have to do it herself, no matter the cost. Kayla Washington spent 2 nights in the county jail. Despite doing nothing wrong, she found herself trapped there after the assistant district attorney, in a bizarre twist, argued that she was a flight risk due to her suspicious government ID. The judge at her previous hearing seemed unconvinced by her plea of innocence. So Kayla, who was only 18, had no choice but to endure the traumatic experience of being held. During that time, she overheard gossip about Officers Donnelly and Murray, the 2 men who arrested her. Some of the older inmates commented that the officers had a history of using rough tactics in falsifying reports, especially when dealing with young black suspects. That knowledge ignited a simmering rage in Kayla. If she was to escape this nightmare, she vowed to expose whatever corruption lurked beneath the surface. Her attorney, Mr. Bennett, had visited her the night before. Speaking through the security glass, he said, "I asked for surveillance footage from the store, but they said the cameras were down. We'll keep digging. There has to be another way to confirm your alibi." Kayla nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "My school records," she suggested. "They'll prove I was in class all day." "That's next on my list," Mr. Bennett assured her. "I have statements from teachers, classmates, even the bus driver. If we can get them to talk, we can discredit the so-called witnesses. If not, we'll have to prove they were mistaken or lying." Kayla pressed her forehead against the glass. "I'm just scared," she admitted. "What if that's not enough?" Compassion filled Mr. Bennett's eyes. "We'll do everything we can," he promised. "Come on." Now, as she approached the Waterside Federal Courthouse, Kayla noticed a group of reporters gathered at the entrance. A sheriff's deputy muttered something about a high-profile corruption case on the docket that day, a case that had caught the attention of major news outlets. Kayla silently prayed that no cameras would be trained on her. The last thing she wanted was to be the headline tomorrow. She was ushered into a simple, fluorescent-lit hallway where she would wait with the other detainees for her turn before the judge. Her mother, Rochelle, would be in the courtroom, and Mr. Bennett would be at her side as they entered the courtroom. Kayla tried to slow her breathing, rehearsing the events in her head as if she were preparing for an argument. The main points ran through her mind. "I was at school all day. Teachers, students, and staff could verify my whereabouts. Security footage, if it was available, would reveal that I had not been anywhere near that store. My CIA internship badge was not fake." Still, a terrifying thought occurred to her. What if the CIA refused to confirm her location, citing confidentiality agreements? Without official acknowledgement, Kayla's ID might be considered a forgery. She took a slow breath, trying to quell her anxiety. One step at a time, she told herself. The truth might be enough, if only someone would believe it. She heard her name called. It was time. With the handcuffs still wrapped around her wrists, Kayla squared her shoulders and stepped forward, determined to reclaim her future, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. Kayla Davis knew she couldn't force the agency to speak up on her behalf. If they chose to keep their distance, she was on her own, unless they decided otherwise. Finally, the bailiff called Kayla's name. She was led into the courtroom, her heart pounding so hard she feared everyone could hear it. Her eyes scanned the room until she spotted her mother in the front row. Though her mom's eyes were swollen from tears, she looked resolute, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mr. Townsend, Kayla's attorney, gave a silent nod of encouragement. Presiding was a stern-faced judge with a no-nonsense demeanor. She asked Kayla to approach with her counsel. The assistant district attorney, Miss Caldwell, an ambitious woman in her late 30s, began outlining the charges. The defendant, Kayla Davis, is accused of participating in an armed robbery at the market on 5th and Rose. An eyewitness placed her at the scene, and she was found fleeing the vicinity shortly thereafter. We request that the charges move forward and that bail remain denied, given the suspicious nature of the government ID she was carrying. Kayla's pulse roared in her ears. The phrase armed robbery made her stomach churn. She had never so much as touched a firearm in her life. This was pure madness. Mr. Townsend spoke next, his voice steady. Your Honor, this is a grave misunderstanding. My client maintains her innocence. She was at school all day, under supervised activities, and we have over a dozen individuals ready to testify to that fact. Furthermore, the ID Ms. Davis holds is not fake. She's enrolled in a valid government internship, which can be verified. Ms. Caldwell arched an eyebrow, shifting her attention from Mr. Townsend to Kayla. Verified by whom? The defendant refuses to name the individual who gave her this so-called CIA badge. Kayla's stomach nodded. She had tried telling the officers about her contact, Ms. Lawson, the liaison overseeing a high-potential outreach program, but Ms. Lawson had her sign strict confidentiality papers. Kayla had phoned Ms. Lawson from jail, leaving a single whispered voicemail. She prayed someone at the agency would step forward. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. I won't deny this is an unusual situation. However, Ms. Davis is only 18, has no prior record, and appears to have strong ties to this community. I'm inclined to grant bail if the defense can produce credible verification of her identity and internship. Mr. Townsend cleared his throat. We request a brief recess, Your Honor, so we can gather that verification. The judge considered for a moment. Very well. We'll reconvene in 2 days. Ms. Davis will remain in custody until then. Kayla's shoulders slumped. Another 2 days. She fought back tears, knowing her future lay in the balance. As deputies led her away, she stole one last glance at her mother. In that moment, all Kayla wanted was to prove she wasn't a criminal, just an 18-year-old girl whose only mistake had been trusting a system that now threatened to devour her. Until that time, unless the defense provides immediate proof of her CIA affiliation or secures a surety bond. Next case. With that, Tiana Morgan was led away, tears stinging her eyes. Anita, her mother, tried to rush forward, but security held her back. Tiana felt her heart sink further. She'd been so close to release, yet remained caged. Each passing day felt like another piece of her future falling apart. Back in the holding block, she rested her head in her hands, trying to block out the humiliating clangs of cell gates. She needed someone at the CIA to step in, but feared the agency wouldn't welcome public scrutiny over an intern with limited clearance. Tiana's break came late that evening. A guard woke her with news of a visitor. Rubbing away the grogginess, she entered the visitation room. Behind the plexiglass sat a woman in a crisp navy suit, hair in a tight bun. Tiana's eyes widened in recognition. Ms. Howard's, her CIA liaison. Tiana, the woman said quietly, I just found out what happened. I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. Pressing a trembling hand to the glass, Tiana poured out her relief. They've charged me with robbery. They think my ID is fake. Please, you have to help me. Ms. Howard's nodded. I'll do what I can. It's delicate. I'm authorized to confirm your internship to the judge, but nothing more. We usually don't handle matters this way, but your freedom takes priority. She paused, her gaze sweeping Tiana's weary face. You should never have been arrested at all. Tiana exhaled slowly, tears of gratitude edging her eyes. She wanted to grab Ms. Howard's hand, but the plexiglass made that impossible. Thank you, she whispered. Please hurry. The next day, Tiana learned Ms. Howard's had submitted a sworn affidavit verifying Tiana's participation in the CIA's Emerging Talent Program. It included her acceptance letter, with classified details redacted. Armed with this document, Mr. Russell, her attorney, requested an emergency hearing. Influenced by official evidence, Judge Maxwell granted Tiana bail. The moment Tiana stepped onto the courthouse steps, Anita enveloped her in a hug so fierce it stole her breath. A few reporters hanging around for another high-profile trial snapped pictures, but Tiana ducked her head, longing only to go home, shower, and sleep in her own bed. Yet as she walked away, Tiana knew it wasn't truly over. A full hearing loomed in the coming week. That evening, she sat on their threadbare living room couch while Mr. Russell perched on an old armchair across from her. We'll need more evidence to clear you completely, he said gently. Tiana nodded, her stomach knotting at the thought of returning to court. Still, there was a glimmer of hope. The CIA had stepped in, just enough to free her for now. With Anita's unwavering support, Tiana resolved not to let one false accusation destroy her future. As she glanced around the dimly lit living room, she realized the next days would demand courage, late-night strategizing, and constant anxiety. But for the first time since her arrest, she believed she could reclaim the life she'd fought so hard to build. Seated across from Kaya Brown and her mother, Grace, Attorney Mr. Hamilton organized a stack of paperwork on the living room coffee table. Grace offered him a mug of coffee, which he accepted with a tired smile. "Here's the plan," Hamilton said softly, stirring in a bit of sugar. "The prosecution's case hinges on this so-called eyewitness, plus the fact that Kaya happened to be near the store at that time. We'll counter with her school attendance, teacher statements, and proof that she only got off the bus by coincidence. We'll show time logs from the bus route, sign-out sheets from her debate club, everything. We'll also emphasize the affidavit from Ms. Winston confirming Kaya's CIA internship is real, nullifying the claim that her ID was fake." He paused, tapping the thick file. "We do, however, need to poke holes in their eyewitness's account. The store cameras were supposedly broken, leaving no direct footage, so that witness becomes critical. If we can discredit them, the whole prosecution might fall apart." Kaya listened intently, glancing between Hamilton and her mother. Grace gave Kaya's hand a reassuring squeeze. Though Kaya's heart pounded at the idea of testifying before a judge, she knew it was her best shot at clearing her name. One issue still loomed: her CIA affiliation. The agency helped secure her bail, but how involved would they be going forward? Ms. Winston had warned her to avoid media exposure for the badge if possible. Yet Kaya suspected that once she took the stand, every secret would come to light. The weight of that reality pressed on her mind. Nonetheless, a surge of determination filled her. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom now. She fought for her future, for the principle that justice shouldn't be derailed by bias. She also knew Officers Donnelly and Barstow had to face accountability for their actions, though she wasn't sure how to proceed. She promised herself she wouldn't let it go once she proved her innocence. The trial day arrived in a fog of tension and tentative hope. Early that morning, Kaya woke with her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. She wore a simple navy blouse and black slacks, while Grace fussed over her hair to ensure every curl was in place. The ride to the courthouse was quiet except for Kaya's shaky breathing and her mother's anxious fidgeting with the hem of her purse. Outside the courthouse, Kaya spotted the same group of reporters. They were mostly fixated on a high-profile corruption hearing, but a few recognized her as the teen CIA imposter, a sensational headline that had surfaced the day before. Camera flashes flickered, and Kaya bowed her head, wishing she could vanish. Inside, she tried to steady her breathing, mentally rehearsing her key points. "I was in class all day. I have teachers and classmates who can confirm that. There should be bus records and sign-out logs. The CIA internship badge is authentic." Despite her fear, she refused to let prejudice rob her of the life she'd worked so hard to build. Clutching Grace's hand, Kaya stepped into the courthouse lobby, resolved to reveal the truth, even if it meant exposing more than she'd ever planned. Naomi instinctively ducked her head and hurried into the courthouse. Mr. Patterson, her lawyer, greeted her in the hallway. "Ready?" he asked, though he could plainly see the fear in her eyes. She gave a small nod and swallowed hard. Together with her mother, Teresa, they entered the courtroom, which was moderately crowded. Naomi spotted Ms. Carver, her CIA liaison, sitting quietly in the back. Just seeing her there offered Naomi a slight sense of reassurance. Judge Chambers entered and everyone rose. Once seated, the assistant district attorney, Ms. Walters, wasted no time. She delivered a poised opening statement, portraying Naomi as a cunning young woman who had lied about government credentials, exploited her youth to dodge suspicion, and orchestrated a robbery that netted thousands from the convenience store's register. She then called Officer Carlisle to testify about the arrest. Taking the stand with an air of righteous indignation, Carlisle described how Naomi loitered near the crime scene, tried to flee, and produced a phony CIA badge when questioned. Listening to his testimony, Naomi's hands balled into fists under the table. The officer was blatantly twisting events. She remembered how calmly she had tried to comply, but Carlisle's depiction painted her as hostile and deceptive. Next, Ms. Walters called the purported eyewitness, a middle-aged man named Wesley Green, who stepped forward in a wrinkled button-down shirt, shifting his gaze uneasily. Naomi studied him. She'd never seen this man before. Under Ms. Walters' prompting, Green claimed to have seen Naomi dash out of the store right after the robbery alarm went off. Naomi's heart pounded. That was a blatant lie. She hadn't set foot in that store at all that day. When it was Mr. Patterson's turn, He cross-examined Green with measured intensity. "Mr. Green," he began, "you claim you saw my client, Miss Bennett, exiting the store just after the alarm, correct?" Green nodded hastily, refusing to meet Naomi's eyes. "Yes, that's right," Mr. Patterson continued. "And what were you doing in that area at the time?" "I was just walking by, stepped out for a smoke break from my job at the auto shop," Green answered, voice wavering. Mr. Patterson flipped through a file. "That would be Danley's garage, right?" Green nodded again. "It's closed on Mondays," Mr. Patterson added. A murmur spread through the gallery. Green swallowed, stammering about mixing up the dates. Mr. Patterson pressed forward. "So your statement that you saw Ms. Bennett on Monday, the day of the robbery, was inaccurate? Or perhaps you never saw her at all?" Green faltered, glancing at Ms. Walters for rescue, but the damage was done. Everyone could see the cracks in his testimony. Mr. Patterson then presented Naomi's rock-solid school records, detailing her debate club meeting and bus route times, precisely aligning with her alibi. Naomi risked a glance at Judge Chambers, who looked thoughtful, even skeptical of the prosecution's case. Hope flared in Naomi's chest. As she exhaled, it felt like a measure of truth finally found its way into the courtroom, a truth she prayed would set her free. Officer O'Donnell and Officer Marston stood just outside the courtroom doors, their stances rigid, their expressions unreadable. Naomi Bennett, freshly acquitted of all charges, felt an unsteady mixture of relief and righteous anger swirling inside her. Moments ago, the judge had dismissed the prosecution's entire case, citing the irreparable damage done by false testimony and the compelling evidence that proved Naomi's innocence. She was free, and yet she couldn't fully exhale. Not while the two officers who had arrested her under such dubious pretenses remained unaccountable. Her mother, Teresa, clutched Naomi's arm protectively as they emerged into the hallway. Camera flashes from a handful of reporters momentarily blinded her, and she heard their voices rising in a clamorous wave. "Naomi, how do you feel? Are you truly affiliated with the CIA? Do you plan to sue the police department?" Naomi swallowed hard. She hadn't planned to speak to the press, but fate seemed to push her forward. Before she could answer, Mr. Patterson, her attorney, approached with a stack of papers in hand. His phone buzzed incessantly, likely calls from various media outlets wanting a statement. The hum of conversation and the bright, crackling overhead lights made everything feel a bit surreal. O'Donnell cleared his throat, looking as though he wanted to vanish. Marston opened his mouth as if to say something, but caught sight of reporters angling their microphones in his direction and immediately snapped it shut. A hush fell over the hallway. Naomi could sense the tension, a collective breath being held. She raised her chin, heart hammering in her chest. "I was never a threat," she said, her voice carrying a tremor of outrage. "And I wasn't lying. You treated me like a criminal for walking down the street, simply because I was young, black, and in possession of a CIA internship badge you refused to believe was real." O'Donnell's eyes flicked away, and Marston stared at the floor. Neither offered any response. Whether from shame or fear, Naomi couldn't tell, and in that moment, she realized their silence only underscored how precarious her situation had been. Another outcome, another day, and she might have remained behind bars. Beside her, Teresa squeezed Naomi's hand. "Let's go home," she whispered. "You've been through enough." Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs," he announced loudly enough for the reporters to hear. "Additionally, there may be grounds for civil action." The small crowd of journalists murmured, scribbling notes and snapping more photos. Naomi's cheeks warmed under the scrutiny, but she refused to bow her head. Summoning what remained of her courage, she turned back to the reporters. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, "but I do know I'm not finished fighting. Not just for me, but for anyone else caught in the same situation. No one deserves to be treated like this." With that, she let Teresa guide her toward the exit. The hallway erupted in a flurry of voices and camera flashes. Every step Naomi took felt like a reclamation of her life. She was free to walk away now, but in a sense, her real journey, bringing accountability to the system that nearly destroyed her, was only just beginning. Officer Parker stood by the elevator, conferring in hushed, urgent tones with Miss Foster, the assistant district attorney. Their faces were grim. In that moment, Tamara Hayes felt a pang of recognition. She remembered the rumors circulating in jail, those whispers of officers who planted evidence or used questionable witnesses to secure convictions. She recalled how some women inside spoke of Parker and his partner having done this before. Noticing Tamara's gaze, Mr. Andrews, her lawyer, gently touched her arm. "Might be worth looking into," he murmured, "but focus on your own well-being first." Tamara nodded, mentally filing the thought away. She wasn't going to forget. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with cameras and notepads. One from a local news outlet called out, "Miss Hayes, how does it feel to have your charges dropped? Are you really working with the CIA?" Caught off guard, Tamara blinked, unsure what to say. Mr. Andrews stepped in, offering a succinct statement. Tamara was an innocent teenager, misidentified by law enforcement, and the justice system had done its job. Tamara managed a quick, polite smile, then let her mother, Ava, steer her clear of the crowd. Later that afternoon, Tamara found herself back home, curled on the couch under a throw blanket, sipping hot tea. Exhaustion weighed on her, both physically and emotionally. At least now she was safe in her own living room. Ava sat beside her, gently rubbing her shoulder. The local news played in the background, covering recent city events. Tamara's story popped up on screen, the headline reading, "Robbery charges dismissed for teen, CIA internship confirmed." She cringed at the attention, yet felt a glimmer of pride. She'd been vindicated, but in her mind, it wasn't a complete victory. The same officers who wrongfully arrested her still wore their badges. She let the question linger. Was it solely racial profiling, or was there more? Either way, Tamara believed someone needed to be held accountable. Perhaps she could file a formal complaint, or even consider a civil lawsuit, though she worried about potential backlash. Could she handle more conflict? A few days later, Tamara received a phone call from Ms. Leland, her CIA liaison. "Tamara, how are you holding up?" Ms. Leland asked in a gentle tone. "I'm okay," Tamara replied quietly, "just trying to process everything." "I spoke with my superiors," Ms. Leland said. "They're aware of your situation. Typically, the agency doesn't intervene in local policing matters, but we support you. You're still part of our emerging talent program if you want to continue." Relief flooded Tamara's chest. She had feared her run-in with the law would derail her CIA prospects. "Yes," she said softly, "I want to keep going." She hesitated, unsure if it was wise to share her thoughts on seeking accountability. Picking up on Tamara's unease, Ms. Leland added, "You have every right to pursue justice, but proceed carefully. If you file a complaint or lawsuit, the agency can't officially back you. However, we won't stand in your way." When the call ended, Tamara slowly set down her phone. A swirl of emotions coursed through her. Relief at knowing her future with the agency remained intact, and resolve that someone needed to answer for what had been done to her. She might still be young, but she was determined not to let her ordeal become just another statistic lost in the shuffle. That night, Tiana Carter experienced a bittersweet mix of gratitude and frustration. The CIA wouldn't punish her for speaking out, yet they weren't going to aid her either. Still, at least they weren't shutting her down. Around the kitchen table, Tiana and her mother, Anita, discussed their options with Mr. Patterson, her lawyer. Ultimately, they agreed to file a formal complaint with the Metro Police Review Board and to consider a civil rights lawsuit for wrongful arrest and emotional distress. When word got out about Tiana's decision, the media latched onto the story again. An 18-year-old, also an active CIA intern, taking on the police force was big news. Some outlets painted her as a hero, a voice for those wronged by law enforcement, while others accused her of seeking profit or stirring up trouble. Tiana ignored the noise, focusing on her looming high school graduation and her upcoming start at Eastwood University. Fate, however, had more in store. One afternoon, Tiana was sitting in Mr. Patterson's cramped office, reviewing lawsuit details, when the phone rang. Mr. Patterson answered, listened quietly, and then his eyes widened. "Right," he said. "We'll be right there." He hung up and turned to Tiana, looking serious. "That was Detective Alvarez. She wants to talk. Says it's urgent." A cold chill ran through Tiana. Why would the detective who'd processed her arrest need to see her now? They met Detective Alvarez at a small cafe near the precinct. She wore plain clothes to avoid attention, glancing around warily before taking a seat in a back booth. Leaning in, her voice low, Alvarez said, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm done watching innocent people get railroaded. I've got information about Officers Parker and Mullins." Mr. Patterson exchanged a look with Tiana. "We're listening." Alvarez took a measured breath. "They're part of an informal group of officers who pad their arrest stats. They target easy marks: young black residents, immigrants, people with fewer resources to fight back. They're praised for reducing crime. The eyewitness in your case? A paid informant they use whenever they need a quick ID to seal a conviction." A wave of nausea rolled over Tiana. "That's how they build cases?" she asked, anger shaking her voice. Alvarez nodded gravely. "I've been quietly gathering proof, but you know how the blue wall works. I have enough fragments to raise suspicions, but not enough for a slam dunk. If you push forward with your lawsuit and complaint, and we pool our findings, we might blow this open. But we'll need more documentation, testimony, anything linking these officers to misconduct." Mr. Patterson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Are you prepared to go on record about this?" Alvarez hesitated. "My career's on the line, but yes, I'm ready if it means stopping them. They've done this for too long. Someone has to end it." Silence fell as Tiana processed the detective's words. She'd only just escaped her own nightmare. Now an even bigger challenge loomed, challenging a system that had nearly destroyed her and making sure no one else had to endure the same injustice. "Finally exposing their corruption means I'll do it," Tiana Carter declared, feeling a surge of admiration for Detective Alvarez. Tiana had initially dismissed her as just another cog in the machine, but here she was, risking her position to do the right thing. "What can I do to help?" Tiana asked, determined. Alvarez held Tiana's gaze. "Your story is key. Not only do you have proof of a false arrest, but your CIA affiliation has drawn enough attention that if you speak up, people will listen. Then there's the matter of fabricated evidence and our so-called eyewitness, Green, who perjured himself. If we can find others with similar stories who are willing to come forward, we could potentially build a class action case." Tiana's mind spun at the magnitude of it all, scary and thrilling at the same time. She remembered the sleepless nights in jail, the terror and helplessness no one should face for a crime they didn't commit. In that instant, she made her decision. "I'm in," she said firmly. "I want these officers held accountable." Thus began a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and late-night phone calls. Mr. Patterson and Detective Alvarez furnished Tiana with lists of potential victims, people believed to have been wrongfully targeted by Officers Parker and Mullins. Some had left the city, others were still languishing in legal limbo, lacking resources to fight back. Tiana and her mother, Anita, spent evenings on the phone, hearing harrowing tales of intimidation, trumped-up charges, and coerced guilty pleas. Some were too afraid to speak out. Others jumped at the chance to clear their names. As days turned into weeks, Tiana juggled finishing her final semester of high school, prepping for her upcoming freshman orientation at Evergreen University, and uniting a coalition of people victimized by unscrupulous cops. Local media caught wind of her efforts, dubbing Tiana the teen whistleblower. She disliked the sensational label, but realized it helped shed light on the truth. The city buzzed with tension. The Metro Police Department announced an internal investigation, placing Parker and Mullins on paid administrative leave, an act Tiana suspected was mostly for show. She also started getting ominous phone calls, no caller ID, just heavy breathing or hissed threats urging her to drop the lawsuit. She reported each incident to Mr. Patterson, who told her to be cautious. Detective Alvarez suspected these calls might come from allies of Parker and Mullins, trying to intimidate Tiana into silence. All of it took a toll on her mental well-being. Tiana often woke in a cold sweat, haunted by nightmares of her arrest. She dreamt of stepping into that convenience store, only for Parker to corner her. She'd scream for help, but no sound emerged. Morning after morning, she'd force herself out of bed, reminding herself, this fight was bigger than her fear. And despite the weight pressing down on her, she felt a growing resolve. Her struggle was not just for herself, but for everyone who'd found themselves powerless under a system that overlooked truth in favor of convenience. Naomi fought to shake off the lingering nightmares, telling herself she was safe now that she was fighting back. Yet some traumas settled like ghosts, refusing to leave by mere force of will. Through it all, she clung to her mother's support, Ms. Leland's guarded help, and her unwavering belief in her own pursuit of justice. She found pockets of solace in her bedroom, tinkering with cryptography puzzles from her CIA training or journaling about her surreal life. An 18-year-old CIA intern and a civil rights advocate. Classmates treated her with a mix of awe and hesitancy. Most believed her story, since they'd literally seen her at school that day, but Naomi sensed their discomfort with the media attention. Graduation day at Hayes Senior High came at last. As Naomi crossed the stage, applause and cheers echoed from her classmates, and the faculty gave her a standing ovation. Accepting her diploma with trembling hands and teary eyes, she realized this celebration marked the end of one long journey, but also the beginning of another, more challenging one. In late June, Naomi's civil lawsuit against officers Carlisle and Miller and the entire Metro Police Department had its first major hearing. The city filed a motion to dismiss, branding her allegations as unsubstantiated. But Naomi and Mr. Mathers, her attorney, arrived prepared. They brought statements from other victims, Detective Alvarez's inside knowledge, and concrete evidence tying these officers to repeated misconduct. The hearing took place in the same courthouse where Naomi had once stood accused. Walking those corridors with her head held high, she wore a crisp white blouse and black pants. Her mother, Evelyn, strode beside her with quiet determination, while Mr. Mathers clutched an overstuffed briefcase, his expression resolute. Inside, Naomi saw officers Carlisle and Miller for the first time since her exoneration. Their glares betrayed open hostility, and they were accompanied by a sharp-suited attorney Naomi recognized from other high-profile police defense cases. Tension thickened the air. Called to testify, Detective Alvarez recounted her observations of Carlisle and Miller's dubious arrests, including Naomi's. She described a pattern of heavy-handed tactics, a paid eyewitness, and the pressure to clean up the community by any means necessary. Next, Naomi took the stand, recounting her ordeal in detail, how she'd been arrested without cause, her pleas dismissed, and her valid ID scorned as counterfeit. She explained the essentials of her CIA internship, what she could legally share anyway, and made clear that, if nothing else, her involvement with the agency demonstrated she had every reason to uphold the law, not break it. She glanced at the judge, Honorable Stratton, who listened with rapt attention. The attorneys for the city shifted uncomfortably, no doubt aware of how thoroughly Naomi's story dismantled their motion to dismiss. By the time Naomi finished, the silence in the courtroom felt charged with possibility. She stepped down from the stand and rejoined Evelyn at the plaintiff's table, heart pounding. In that moment, she understood the gravity of her decision to stand up not only for herself, but also for all those who'd been silenced under the guise of justice. No matter what lay ahead, Naomi was determined to see it through to the end. The officers had made no effort to confirm her identity. Mr. Harris presented statements from half a dozen people who had faced bogus charges under Officers Donnelly and Marks. Each account echoed the same pattern: intimidation, lies, flimsy evidence. Taken together, they painted a damning portrait of systematic misconduct. When the officer's attorney cross-examined Tamara Hayes, he tried portraying her as a sensationalist fueling a media circus. Tamara remained composed, explaining that all she wanted was to clear her name and prevent such injustices from happening to others. Her poise under questioning drew murmurs of approval from some in the gallery. The decisive moment came when the judge denied the city's motion to dismiss, citing substantial evidence that warranted a full trial. Donnelly and Marks exchanged dark looks. Tamara felt a swell of relief. Her case would proceed, and she'd push past their first line of defense. Actual justice felt a step closer. In the weeks that followed, settlement talks began behind closed doors. Facing increasing public pressure, the city proposed a financial settlement for Tamara and the other plaintiffs, along with vague promises of reforms. Tamara and her group were conflicted. They needed true policy changes and a public admission of wrongdoing. Money alone wasn't enough. Around that time, Tamara received an unexpected invitation, a small ceremony at the local community center where a grassroots organization fighting police corruption planned to honor her courage. She hesitated, wary of drawing more attention, but her mother, Sylvia, urged her to attend, pointing out how Tamara's story offered hope to many. On the evening of the ceremony, Tamara stood on a simple stage before a modest crowd of activists, neighbors, and families. She saw tears glistening in the eyes of those who had endured their own run-ins with suspect policing. "I'm only 18, she said into the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "I never wanted to be here, but when the system threatens to break you, sometimes you have no choice but to stand up. I'm grateful for everyone joining me in this fight." Thunderous applause erupted. Tamara's gaze landed on a figure at the back, Ms. Leland, her CIA liaison, who had slipped in quietly. She offered Tamara a subtle nod of respect, and Tamara smiled, heart brimming. As the summer continued, Tamara balanced preparations for Kensington University's orientation, her ongoing CIA coursework, and finalizing details of the lawsuit. Rumors swirled that Donnelly and Marks were under internal investigation for multiple counts of misconduct, with potential criminal charges on the horizon. The tipping point arrived in August, nearly a year after Tamara's wrongful arrest. By then, the scandal had grown into a citywide reckoning. More victims came forward, each story matching the patterns she had already exposed. Public sentiment shifted decisively against the crooked officers, and municipal leaders had little choice but to respond. For Tamara, it meant all her sleepless nights and anxious days might lead to real change. As she and Sylvia left the community center that evening, she let out a shaky breath. This battle was far from over, but for the first time, she believed her voice, and the voices of everyone she'd rallied was too loud to ignore. Nearly a year after Naomi Bennett's fateful arrest, a dramatic turn of events unfolded. Wesley Green, the false eyewitness who had testified against her, agreed to a plea deal with the district attorney. In exchange for leniency, he provided damaging evidence against officers Carlisle and Miller. Green admitted they'd paid him to implicate Naomi and others, revealing each step of their scheme. Faced with his confession, the city had no choice but to stop defending the officers. Within days, Carlisle and Miller were arrested on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of perjury. News headlines blazed, "Corrupt cops charged after teen whistleblower exposes lies." For Naomi, it was a mixture of relief and sorrow. She took no pleasure in seeing people's lives destroyed, yet she believed justice demanded accountability. The ensuing trial against the two officers was swift and decisive. Armed with Green's admission, Detective Alvarez's findings, and a mountain of evidence, the jury found Carlisle and Miller guilty. They were sentenced to prison, their badges forever stripped. Watching the verdict on television, Naomi recalled the day they had handcuffed her, how helpless she'd felt. Now the tables had turned, and they would pay for their wrongdoing. In the aftermath, the city settled Naomi's civil lawsuit, offering a substantial financial award not only to her, but also to the other plaintiffs who joined. More importantly, the settlement included binding reforms, stricter oversight on informant use, mandatory training on racial bias, and tighter accountability procedures. The mayor held a press conference calling Naomi's story a catalyst for meaningful change. Naomi hoped those words weren't just political lip service. To Naomi, the money was enough to cover college without student loans and to help her mother with overdue bills, but the victory meant more than dollars and cents. It was an affirmation that she had stood, not just for herself, but for a community often sidelined by those sworn to protect them. With her acceptance to Devon University secured and her CIA internship set to resume in an official capacity, Naomi spent the last days of summer packing her belongings, reflecting on the roller coaster year she'd survived. It had tested her courage, her resilience, and her faith in the justice system. But she'd emerged stronger, more determined than ever to use her abilities for the greater good. In late August, Naomi found herself strolling across Devon University's campus for the first time as a registered student. Sunlight illuminated the historic buildings and the bustling throng of moving students. She felt a surge of hope rising within her chest, a reminder that even after all the turmoil, a brighter future was hers to claim. She paused near a large fountain, letting the hum of conversation wash over her. Laughter from a nearby group of freshmen reminded her of how normal life was supposed to be at 18, and how quickly that normalcy could be ripped away. Pulling her campus map from her bag, Naomi made her way toward orientation, her head held high. She'd fought a system and prevailed. Now a brand new chapter beckoned, one where she could shape not only her future, but perhaps alter the landscape for others as well. Place that had nurtured countless civil rights icons and brilliant minds. Finding her assigned dormitory, she introduced herself to her new roommate, a sociology major named Alana. Although Alana recognized Naomi from the local news, she greeted her calmly before returning to her unpacking duties. That evening, Naomi ventured out for a walk around campus, the early evening dusk casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. She stopped near the library, breathing in the warm, jasmine-scented air. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she felt at peace. Her phone rang. The screen read Ms. Roswell, her CIA contact. Naomi smiled and picked up. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "I wanted to congratulate you," Ms. Roswell answered, her voice full of pride. "Starting college is a milestone." Naomi glanced at the CIA badge in her purse, remembering everything it symbolized. "There are days when I still can't believe how far I've come," she admitted softly. "A few months ago, I was terrified I was going to be locked up for a crime I didn't commit. Now I'm a freshman at Linwood, and I'm still an intern at the agency. It's unbelievable." "Life likes to throw curved balls," Ms. Roswell said, "but you've handled them with such grace. We're proud to have you on board. You have a bright future." As the call ended, Naomi recalled the chaotic day of her arrest, the crushing weight of injustice she felt. Then her mind flashed back to her final day in court, the collective gasp as she revealed her legitimate CIA badge, and the way the prosecution's false narrative crumbled before her eyes. A gentle warmth filled her chest. She had won. She had reclaimed both her freedom and her dignity, proving that even the most solid walls of injustice could be shaken by a resolute voice. She also knew that she was not alone. Her mother, Grace, her lawyer, Mr. Patterson, her CIA contact, and the community had rallied around her when she needed them most. Under the vast night sky, Naomi felt a new purpose welling up inside her. Yes, she was still young, still learning, but she had proven that a single voice, even that of an 18-year-old, could challenge an entire system and create real change. Many had joined her cause, and together they had overcome the barriers that often silence the vulnerable. Classes would begin tomorrow. Soon she will resume her CIA training, perhaps working on a specialized project that Ms. Roswell has hinted will put Naomi's analytical mind to good use. The road ahead is full of unknowns, but she welcomes them all with open arms. She has been given a second chance, a stronger foundation, and unshakable proof that with persistence, alliances, and a commitment to what is right, even the highest barriers can be broken. Naomi Carter, once just an 18-year-old girl wrongly accused, has stepped out of the shadows of injustice into a bright, promising future. In that light, she senses the seeds of great change, not just for herself, but for all those who have been told to keep quiet in the face of wrongdoing. What do you think? Will justice ever be served? Naomi Carter's story reflects a reality that still exists in modern society. Sometimes young people in disadvantaged communities can be discriminated against, suspected, or even wrongly arrested due to prejudice. However, Naomi's journey shows that with perseverance, courage, and solidarity, we can create change. Always believe in your own worth. When faced with injustice, the most important thing is to firmly believe that you have the right to be heard and treated fairly. Don't let circumstances or slander make you doubt your own worth. Collect clear evidence and documents. If you find yourself in a situation where you are wrongly accused or face injustice, persistently collect evidence, documents, statements, minutes, etc., to strengthen your argument. Truth has its own power, but it must be demonstrated through specific, clear evidence. Connect and find support from the community and organizations. Naomi's story recognizes the important role of allies, family, lawyers, social organizations, even government agencies, CIA, in protecting her. In real life, if you are facing difficulties, seek support from groups, nonprofit organizations, or individuals who are knowledgeable about the law. Don't be afraid to go public and bring the matter to light. Pressure from public opinion and the media can be a great motivation for change. Although you may be afraid of the crowd, going public with your story sometimes helps you gain sympathy and raise your voice to demand justice. Stay focused, keep learning and growing. Naomi maintained her education while fighting for justice, eventually achieving positive results. Don't let unfair circumstances stop your academic or career future. On the evening of the ceremony, Tamara stood on a simple stage before a modest crowd of activists, neighbors, and families. She saw tears glistening in the eyes of those who had endured their own run-ins with suspect policing. "I'm only 18, she said into the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "I never wanted to be here, but when the system threatens to break you, sometimes you have no choice but to stand up. I'm grateful for everyone joining me in this fight." Thunderous applause erupted. Tamara's gaze landed on a figure at the back, Ms. Leland, her CIA liaison, who had slipped in quietly. She offered Tamara a subtle nod of respect, and Tamara smiled, heart brimming. As the summer continued, Tamara balanced preparations for Kensington University's orientation, her ongoing CIA coursework, and finalizing details of the lawsuit. Rumors swirled that Donnelly and Marks were under internal investigation for multiple counts of misconduct, with potential criminal charges on the horizon. The tipping point arrived in August, nearly a year after Tamara's wrongful arrest. By then, the scandal had grown into a citywide reckoning. More victims came forward, each story matching the patterns she had already exposed. Public sentiment shifted decisively against the crooked officers, and municipal leaders had little choice but to respond. For Tamara, it meant all her sleepless nights and anxious days might lead to real change. As she and Sylvia left the community center that evening, she let out a shaky breath. This battle was far from over, but for the first time, she believed her voice, and the voices of everyone she'd rallied was too loud to ignore. Nearly a year after Naomi Bennett's fateful arrest, a dramatic turn of events unfolded. Wesley Green, the false eyewitness who had testified against her, agreed to a plea deal with the district attorney. In exchange for leniency, he provided damaging evidence against officers Carlisle and Miller. Green admitted they'd paid him to implicate Naomi and others, revealing each step of their scheme. Faced with his confession, the city had no choice but to stop defending the officers. Within days, Carlisle and Miller were arrested on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of perjury. News headlines blazed, "Corrupt cops charged after teen whistleblower exposes lies." For Naomi, it was a mixture of relief and sorrow. She took no pleasure in seeing people's lives destroyed, yet she believed justice demanded accountability. The ensuing trial against the two officers was swift and decisive. Armed with Green's admission, Detective Alvarez's findings, and a mountain of evidence, the jury found Carlisle and Miller guilty. They were sentenced to prison, their badges forever stripped. Watching the verdict on television, Naomi recalled the day they had handcuffed her, how helpless she'd felt. Now the tables had turned, and they would pay for their wrongdoing. In the aftermath, the city settled Naomi's civil lawsuit, offering a substantial financial award not only to her, but also to the other plaintiffs who joined. More importantly, the settlement included binding reforms, stricter oversight on informant use, mandatory training on racial bias, and tighter accountability procedures. The mayor held a press conference calling Naomi's story a catalyst for meaningful change. Naomi hoped those words weren't just political lip service. To Naomi, the money was enough to cover college without student loans and to help her mother with overdue bills, but the victory meant more than dollars and cents. It was an affirmation that she had stood, not just for herself, but for a community often sidelined by those sworn to protect them. With her acceptance to Devon University secured and her CIA internship set to resume in an official capacity, Naomi spent the last days of summer packing her belongings, reflecting on the roller coaster year she'd survived. It had tested her courage, her resilience, and her faith in the justice system. But she'd emerged stronger, more determined than ever to use her abilities for the greater good. In late August, Naomi found herself strolling across Devon University's campus for the first time as a registered student. Sunlight illuminated the historic buildings and the bustling throng of moving students. She felt a surge of hope rising within her chest, a reminder that even after all the turmoil, a brighter future was hers to claim. She paused near a large fountain, letting the hum of conversation wash over her. Laughter from a nearby group of freshmen reminded her of how normal life was supposed to be at 18, and how quickly that normalcy could be ripped away. Pulling her campus map from her bag, Naomi made her way toward orientation, her head held high. She'd fought a system and prevailed. Now a brand new chapter beckoned, one where she could shape not only her future, but perhaps alter the landscape for others as well. Continuous learning, improving knowledge and skills are the solid stepping stones for you to continue moving forward and mastering your destiny. The message from this story reminds us that, even when faced with adversity, dedication and perseverance in pursuing justice will help innocent people escape injustice, and at the same time inspire society to stand up for justice. If you find the story inspiring and want to continue following the content about justice, faith, and other meaningful stories, please click like and subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to not miss the latest updates. Remember to turn on the notification bell to always receive positive and useful stories. Share the video with friends and relatives to spread positive messages and values to more people. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next stories.